A man planted one seed, just one, not 100, not a dozen, one. And that single seed eventually made him the wealthiest man in his entire village. But here's the part that should stop you in your tracks. An old stranger had the chance to give him 100 seeds that day. He chose not to. And that one decision is the exact reason this man's life changed forever. Stay with me, because by the end of this story, you're going to understand something about your own life that you've probably never thought about before. Right now, somewhere in your mind, there's a dream you've been putting off. Maybe it's a business, maybe it's a channel, a book you want to build, a life you want to live. And maybe, just maybe, you've been telling yourself the same thing for months or even years. I'll start when the time is right. Here's the uncomfortable truth. That perfect time never actually arrives. It's not coming next week, it's not coming next month. And the people who seem to have it all figured out, they didn't wait for it either. This is a story about a young man named Luke who had nothing. No money, no talent anyone could point to, no one pulling strings for him, just one small decision. And that decision is what turned him into a legend in his own village. Let's go back to where it all began. Luke lived in a quiet village tucked between rolling hills. Every single evening, he'd walk to the same spot beneath a large tree and just sit there, watching. Merchants would pass through with fine horses, colorful fabrics, wagons stacked with goods. And every time, Luke felt the same ache. He wanted that life. He wanted people to know his name. But every evening ended exactly the way it started, with nothing but a dream. Then, one afternoon, everything shifted. An old traveler stopped near Luke's tree. He looked at him for a moment and asked a simple question. "Why do you sit here every day?" Luke answered honestly, "I'm waiting for the right chance to change my life." The old man glanced around, almost amused. "I don't see any chance coming." "Exactly," Luke sighed. And what the old man said next is something you need to hear because it applies to almost everyone watching this video right now. That's because chances rarely walk toward people who are standing still. Before he left, the traveler handed Luke a small wooden box. Inside was a single seed, just one. Luke was almost insulted. What am I supposed to do with one seed? The old man simply smiled. "You'll understand later." Now, here's where most people would have given up before they even started. The next morning, Luke walked to an empty field. The ground was hard, cracked, and dry. Every instinct told him to turn around. But he remembered the traveler's words, and instead of overthinking it, he dug a small hole and planted the seed. Nothing happened that day. Nothing happened the next day either. A full week passed and still nothing. His neighbors started laughing at him. "You wasted your time," they said. And honestly, Luke started to believe them. But every single morning before the sun came up, he quietly poured a little water onto that soil. No audience, no applause, just him and a seed that refused to show any sign of life. Then, 1 month later, something tiny broke through the surface, a single green leaf. It was so small, most people wouldn't have even noticed it. But to Luke, that tiny leaf was proof of something huge. Small beginnings are still beginnings, and beginnings are alive. He kept caring for it. Months went by. That fragile leaf slowly became a young tree. Still nothing to brag about. The villagers kept mocking him. If you wanted real success, you should have done something bigger. Luke almost believed them again. And then disaster hit. A brutal storm tore through the village. Rain flooded the fields. Wind ripped through crops that families depended on to survive. When the sun came up the next morning, people were in tears. They'd lost almost everything. Luke walked out to check on his little tree, half expecting it to be gone. It was bent, broken in places, but it was still standing. So he did the only thing he knew how to do. He tied the broken branches back together with rope, and he kept showing up for it, day after day. This is the part of the story where everything starts to change. Years passed, and that small, storm-damaged tree grew strong. It began producing fruit unlike anything else in the village. Sweet, unique, unforgettable.
Travelers who tasted it couldn't stop talking about it. Soon, people who had once laughed at Luke were lining up to buy baskets of his fruit. He sold a few baskets, then more. Then he planted seeds from that very first tree, then more trees, then an entire second field. Without even realizing it was happening, Luke had built the largest orchard in the entire region. The same people who mocked him were now walking up to him for advice. One day, a young boy asked him the question everyone wanted to ask. How did you become so successful? Luke's answer was almost too simple to believe. I planted one seed. The boy looked confused. Only one? Yes, Luke said, because one seed becomes a tree. One tree gives you many seeds, and many seeds become a forest. Years later, the same old traveler returned to the village. He stood at the edge of Luke's orchard, stunned by what he saw, and Luke recognized him instantly. You're right, Luke told him. About what? I used to think success needed the perfect chance. It didn't. It only needed my first step. The traveler sat down beside him and finally revealed the one thing Luke had wondered about for years. Do you know why I only gave you one seed? Luke shook his head. Because if I'd given you 100, you would have spent months deciding where to plant them. With only one, you had no choice but to begin. Then he added something that Luke never forgot. Most people don't lose because life is unfair to them. They lose because they spend their whole life preparing instead of starting. As Luke grew older, he started teaching the children in his village. Whenever someone told him, "I'm waiting for the right time," he wouldn't lecture them. He'd simply hand them a single seed and say 6 words: "Start before you are ready." Near the end of his life, Luke walked slowly through his orchard one last time. Thousands of trees swayed around him. Children were laughing as they picked fruit. Families were earning a living from land that once had been empty and cracked. Travelers rested in the shade he had created decades earlier. He stopped at the very first tree, now the oldest and strongest of them all, placed his hand on its trunk and whispered something simple. Thank you for teaching me that greatness never arrives all at once. It begins quietly with one small step. My life didn't change because I got lucky. It changed the day I stopped waiting. After Luke passed away, the villagers placed a wooden sign beside that very first tree. It carried a single sentence: "A dream that begins small is stronger than a dream that never begins." For generations, travelers stopped to read those words, and many of them went home and finally started the thing they'd been putting off for years. Not perfectly, not confidently, but they started, and that was enough. Here's why this story matters more than you might think. Every successful person you admire once had a version of that empty field. People only ever see the finished orchard. They don't see the first video with 0 views. They don't see the first business with 0 customers. They don't see the lonely mornings when nobody was watching and nothing seemed to be working. I'm not going to give you some billionaire example that feels a million miles away from your life. Let me give you something real instead. This channel started at 0. 0 subscribers, 0 community, nothing. If I had waited for the perfect camera, the perfect voice, the perfect script, or the perfect day to start, this channel would still be sitting at 0 right now. Instead, I started with one video, just one. And today, we've grown into a community of more than 16,000 people, all because of a single decision to begin. So here's what I want you to take from this. Whatever dream has been sitting in the back of your mind, stop waiting for it to feel perfect. Take one step today. It might look small, it might feel slow, people might laugh the way Luke's neighbors did, but every forest in the world started with one seed, and your future can start with one small action right now, today. If this story gave you even a little bit of courage to take that first step, do me a favor and subscribe to the channel. We're building something here together, one story at a time. Until next time, keep believing in yourself, keep learning, and most importantly, just start, no matter how small.